Hey, everybody, this is David Gaddini, and we are on Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church. Back in the studio today, along with Andrew Metcalf, and I'm producing over here. Are you live mic today?
I'm live mic.
All right, Kent Jones, fantastic.
Perfect.
I'm live mic here today and part of the discussion.
There we go.
Good to be back. This is a podcast where we invite you, the listener, to drive the discussion by texting in the questions that you might have relating to religion, theology, Christianity, the Bible, spirituality, how to make sense of it all, how to navigate it through. And specifically, these are the questions we encourage you to ask, the ones that you're afraid to ask, embarrassed to ask, feel like you're going to be judged for asking, the questions you're afraid to ask in church. I've been in church work for a long time, as all of us in the studio here have been today. And it's a sad but true reality. In a lot of churches, questions just aren't welcome. And even when they are, sometimes there's just kind of a pall or a spirit that people have upon themselves where they're afraid to ask them for whatever reason. Well, this is the podcast that you can do it. Whatever question you have, it's good. Here's how you ask: 815-314-0363. Give you that again. Text in to 815-314-0363. If you are joining us on Facebook, fantastic. Please like or subscribe. And go ahead and post your questions in the comment, whether you're here at 216 The Net or through fellowshipoffaith.org. So I got to tune in from home last week, laid up with a blown out back, and seeing how AI did on this. And I got to tell you, it was kind of a cool show.
Yeah, it was really cool. I know Steve and I talked about it probably a couple months ago when ChatGPT first came out, and we were like, well, Dave's not going to be there. This sounds like the perfect week for it. And it was, I don't know, it was a really cool just experience. I had never used it in that way of asking it questions or asking it why it thinks people aren't in church or why it thinks certain things. I think some of the answers were hopefully accurate on some of the more historical questions, but also I think really accurate on some of the kind of present day issues.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so what did you think was spot on? What did you think was totally, left field?
Yeah, I thought that the reason, I know we did a question about Lutheran monasteries, and the reasoning that it seemed to give, it seems logical to me that, via the Reformation, Martin Luther was kind of seemingly not against monasteries, but not fully in favor of, as a replacement.
It's a kind way of putting it, right?
Yeah. And I hadn't ever connected that, okay, maybe that is why generally there aren't Lutheran monasteries, is because Martin Luther kind of
was a monk
founded
who
the Lutheran Church,
ceased being a monk and married a nun.
Yeah.
So
I thought that was really cool, and it seemed to make sense to me.
Yeah. All right. All right.
And then I liked at the very beginning, we started with a couple questions about kind of what are the biggest things that keep people out of churches, or what does ChatGPT think are the biggest things? And the list that they came up with, it cut off on my screenshot here, but kind of negative past experiences, whether that's with people in the church, leadership in the church, or the church in general.
Sure.
Disagreements with church teachings, and then just busy schedule. And I think there were other ones, but I don't have them.
But saved. those are kind of the top three that were kind of camping in.
Yeah. So I thought it was cool that it's able to kind of ascertain that from whatever information it's been fed, that, those seem to be the leading causes of people not being in church now.
Now, have you been using ChatGPT in any AI platform in any other kind of capacity?
No, I haven't. I know when they first introduced the public beta probably 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, okay, how can we use this to maybe generate some sermon ideas or graphics or other things like that. And I played around with it a little bit there, but it was still pretty what it thinks church is and what FOF is as a church are two very different things.
Yeah.
So if you say, oh, give me a sermon series or a sermon write-up about this, it's very much in a traditional pastor in a pulpit style.
Yeah.
Versus, I guess, a more relaxed style.
I'll tell you though, that's not just an AI problem. I remember earlier in the history of our church, and for our listeners who don't know, Fellowship of Faith, it is not a traditional church by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. And when we would go into the what I would call the secular market, I'm not talking overtly Christian publishing houses or vendors or things like that, but we go into the secular market, especially looking for branding, people to do marketing for us, things like that. I mean, it's like they could not compute because it's like, we're literally going to you because we like what you do for this band or this club or this thing. But then everything they would produce for us would be, the sanctimonious, right. And it's like, nothing wrong with that, but it's just not our church.
Right.
And so they and AI, I guess, are of the same mind, huh?
Yeah, that's what it seems. We'll see, because now they released version 4 of ChatGPT, and that's supposed to be a pretty big jump ahead of version 3. So
okay,
I haven't tried version 4 yet. I don't even know if that's like a public beta yet. So.
Yeah, I just have not played enough on it myself either but it's one of those things we get on the show. Oh yeah, I got to go home and do that, and then out of mind, Yeah,
it's at the bottom of a very long list.
Yeah, right.
But maybe come this summer, when we're looking at planning out the next kind of school year, maybe it'll have improved by then to go, hey, what do you think we should talk about for this? If nothing else, just generate creative ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Are hopefully using it more for that and not just stealing things from other people.
You're right.
But if you can use this as creating an inspiration list and then building your own thing out of that, I think that's probably the most moral way to use it.
Be cool for like a Bible study or a men's or women's group, or just a group. Be like, okay, here's a verse. What do we think? What is AI?
And use it almost as a conversation partner. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be neat.
Yeah, even what would you call that group? Like Bible studies with AI or something like that, or
artificial Bible intelligence.
Artificial Bible intelligence. I think that works.
There's a lot of that out there, I
think. Speaking along lists, we are coming into what is arguably the busiest week of a church year. Coming into what's traditionally called Holy Week, kicks off with Palm Sunday this Sunday. How you holding up, Andrew?
So far, so good. It seems like there's only so much you can do in preparation, but then especially with stuff like on site, whether it's the equipment rentals or other things like that, you kind of have to wait until the week before. So then it's just the mad rush before Palm Sunday. Really, for our church, that's a huge service for us. And then Holy Week is kind of sustaining that.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling pretty good. It's Wednesday now, so I've got 2.5 days worth of work in, and it's feeling like it's coming together.
All right. All right. Good deal. Yeah.
How about you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sermons, messages to give over the next week.
And I'll tell you, not to underestimate that, but I like to memorize all of the readings and things that we do during this week. Now, to my favor, they're pretty much the same every year. You're doing Easter readings every year. You're doing Palm Sunday readings every year.
Just hit a little refresh on it.
Yeah. It just when you can look at people and you can kind of do it as for lack of a better term, performance. And engage people that way, as opposed to just reading out of the book. I just find it has a better quotient. So that's actually what takes the most time. And the Good Friday stuff we're doing is the one that's really kind of kicking me, because we put that soundtrack to some of those Good Friday readings and trying to get it sequenced and get the rhythm and the cadence. It's not just memorizing it, but finding the pauses and the gaps and the spaces. It's
and still within that, trying to make it sound natural.
Yeah.
But I think that's even more so than when someone is just reading scripture, even if they're the most enthusiastic reader and emotive, it still sounds like they're reading something versus talking to you.
Yeah.
So I think when it is memorized and it becomes conversational, that's I don't want to say it can be more impactful, but then you're relating to God in a conversational way versus let me read from this sheet of paper.
Yeah,
so
and I'll
creates
even
a new relationship with it.
Yeah, you bet. And I'll even say personally that when you memorize it, you're not just delivering lines, you're ingesting it. It is becoming a part of you, because you're thinking about it all the time. You're running it over. You're kind of getting into the nuance. You're letting it emotionally affect you, and it starts to become something that really does come from you, even though you're not the source of the material.
And then you can do like the DSV, the Dave Standard version.
The Dave Standard version. Yeah.
Add your own little twist.
Which is like, what line did he forget? And
no, you just cut that out a little bit. Put the ellipses in,
there you go.
Parentheses, it's all good.
Well, hey man, what do we got in the hopper here today?
Yeah, there was a couple of questions we hit last week that I think I just wanted to touch base on again to make sure there was either nothing out of place or weird that came from AI. So I think the monasteries one seemed like it was pretty pretty spot on with the explanation that it gave.
Yeah, I think so. And there are actually Lutheran monasteries. They're very few and far between. There's one, I think it's called the Augustine House up in Oxford, Michigan, if I'm remembering correctly. And then, Germany and Sweden and what you think of as classic Lutheran countries, so to speak. But right, I mean, you could read what are called Lutheran confessional documents, which are more or less those 16th century writings of those early church reformers that more or less steered and defined, this is who we are, this is what we believe. And there's a lot of language in there about the abuses of monasticism, about the non-necessity of monasticism. And I think it's kind of caused the Lutheran Church and many others to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've talked about this before, but I love to go to Catholic monasteries, and approached in the right way, I think they're incredible. But you just don't really see it a lot for probably those reasons.
Yeah, and again, any good thing taken to an extreme can become a bad thing.
Yeah.
So if your sole thing is to isolate yourself and never have interaction for the sake of doing that, okay, then maybe you've taken it to an extreme. Whereas some retreats at times are fantastic for you, I think.
Right.
To devote time to prayer, to meditation, to reading, to studying. So it's not the thing that's bad, but maybe how it's used sometimes. The other one was the Greek word. I mispronounced it last week too. Ezisan, E-Z-A-S-A-N, Ezisan. Something about bodily resurrection or just a spiritual in heaven body.
Okay, so it's always a little bit tricky to try to figure out what someone's typing in English.
Yeah.
So the Greek word sozo means to save, like salvation, in that sense of the term. Not like save money in the bank, or something like that. So I'm not. Did they give any more details?
Yeah. So in Revelation, how do you view the Greek word as zazon? Does it mean bodily resurrection or just spirit into heaven?
So I'm going to take a stab at this, and again,
Google has a bunch of different spellings of it, so I don't know.
This is a stab, but if you start jumping into like Revelation 20, for example, like that's one place that you'll see this word come to pass. Here's Revelation 25, for example. The rest of the dead did not come back to life until 1,000 years were ended. It's talking about the millennium, so to speak. And this is the first resurrection. And you'll find like Esadzan in there. But I guess what is the question?
Saying, does it mean bodily resurrection or just in spirit into heaven?
It's really going to depend. It's like any word. Context determines everything. So depending on where you're looking at this word is going to drive how the author is using it.
I believe what kind of the answer was last year. It depends on the context, though.
Yeah. So without knowing the specific passage, it's a little bit hard to jump into a little bit more. But anyway, text back in if we can help you with a specific chapter and verse reference here.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one was looking at Revelation. We have one other one here on Revelation. It's a new one.
Okay.
It's a rather lengthy question, so let's dig in.
Okay.
So I've been working hard understanding revelation between what you've been teaching. I think probably at the 9 a.m. Bible study that you do.
Yeah. So at our church, we're doing it's truly turning into like a school year long Bible study through Revelation. We're doing all John's writings, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what you've been teaching and listening to, and then also reading N.T. Wright's teachings on Revelations. It's been very interesting. And I have to say, for the first time, Revelation is so much easier for me to understand with what you are teaching. I find it amazing how so much of what John is saying and teaching comes from Psalm 2, Daniel, and Isaiah chapter 40 to 55. It all really makes so much sense now. I guess one question that's bothering me is, was all this written from John really just through visions, spiritual guidance, apocalyptic writing, etc.? Did he ever really get transported to the throne room of heaven? My guess is no, but that would mean nobody has ever been to heaven. But would that mean nobody has ever been to heaven? Just a question in my mind that needs your help with any answers.
Yeah, first of all, just thanks for the encouragement, and I'm glad that the teaching that we're doing and that is making an impact on you. And it's great to hear that you're reading alongside of it. I mean, NT Wright is fantastic, and I'm glad that you're supplementing in that kind of way. By the way, if you do want to catch out our teachings on Revelation, you can go to fellowshipoffaith.org. Again, fellowshipoffaith.org. Jump on the FOF Plus page. FOF Plus is our basically digital archive and repository. Really original naming, but hopefully it's clear.
And definitely didn't steal the graphic from any of them.
But you can find our podcast on that. You know, we record it all, at least that one we do via audio.
Yeah, and that one's called, the whole podcast is called Bible in Context. And then we have, I believe, 7 seasons, if you will, going through some minor prophets, Galatians, Revelation.
Just whatever part of the Bible that we're hitting. Yeah.
So that's where kind of all the different Bible studies live.
Okay, so to the question on this of whether John is just adopting a trope or a device of being transported into heaven, or whether he really went there. I tend to, let me preface this by saying, I think all of us have to approach the book of Revelation with a lot of humility. At some level, there's just a sense of unknowns to many of these questions that we're asking, but that shouldn't scare you off or cause you to throw your hands up, because there are better guesses than others. And I think in this case, I do truly think that the nature of the book is written as such that John did, in fact, get translated or transported to heaven. I guess you should say that there was a vision that he had. The reason I say that is because John is posturing himself in a long line of prophets who have gone before him and sampling from those prophets. And what's unifying among all of those prophets before him is that they truly were given visions by God or transported to see God or brought up into heaven. And you could say, well, is John just kind of like faking it? You know, is he just kind of going, it didn't really happen to me? Well, there's a reason this isn't the canon. You know, there are plenty of other apocalyptic works that people hold to be, the word is spurious, meaning suspect, you know, not really there, where using synonymous authors and claiming things that may not be true. But there's a reason this one made it in. And I think it's safe to argue that, you know, when John says he saw Jesus, he saw Jesus. When John says he was given a vision of heaven, he was given a vision of heaven. Now, I don't think that should lead to the conclusion that he was just straight dictating either, because certainly the book is a crafted piece of literature. And whatever John saw, he took time to think through and meditate on and kind of piece together for certain ends and purposes, like you see through many works of literature. But I think John was actually there. So great question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's great. One here seems to be a follow-up from some previous Leviticus questions, probably seemingly from the same person.
Okay.
They have another Leviticus question.
Okay, great. You can never have too many Leviticus questions, if you ask me.
It's true. There's a lot going on in there.
There's a lot going on there. Yeah. And it's, you know what, top to bottom, it's just weird.
Yes. Yeah. You're like, I don't know that anyone ever fully understands some of the things in there either.
Can you imagine if like Leviticus was still like the worship manual for like the Christian experience and life today? I mean, just how different things would be.
We're supposed to be like set apart, but that might be a little.
Can we do it in different ways, please?
A little extreme. Yeah. I enjoy my poly blend clothing. So
right.
Let's see. Why must a woman who has given birth give a sin offering? It says chapter 12, verse 6. Isn't she being fruitful and multiplying? I don't understand how filling the earth as God commanded her is an unclean act. Unclean is in quotes.
Yeah. Let me just read Leviticus 12:6. This is coming out of NIV, and then I can share a couple of other translations if you like. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. Here's the thing. Now I'm reading NIV. And what modern translations are classic for doing is footnoting things. And then you go down below and they'll give an alternate translation or way of understanding it. And here in NIV, for example, on sin offering, they're going purification offering. And then making a note, it's also in verse 8. And if you look through a number of English translations, you're going to see it tends to, in the newer ones, lean that way simply because I think the sin offering thing was confusing. I'm not going to get into that. You're on the right track here. There is nothing sinful about giving birth. And in fact, be fruitful and multiply is part of the first command God ever gave in the Bible, and this is pre-sin.
Yeah.
So it is a purification offering in the sense that what you see embedded in the Levitical system is that whenever you come into contact with certain things, most notably blood, there's a certain period of purification that has to be enacted. And when you give birth, there's birthing fluids, there's blood. It's nothing more than ritual cleanness here. It should never be read as an understanding on some kind of like moral lapse or failure, on it being a sin, and something being corrupt here by its nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, great question.
Let's see. Ooh, talking about Ishmael.
All right.
Ishmael was sent away with his mother Hagar. The Lord made a great nation of him.
I can't not think of Van Halen whenever I come across her name. You know,
Yeah,
Ken,
right.
are you with me on
I'm
that?
with you.
Yeah.
Um,
You know who Van Halen is, right, Andrew?
I know that they're a band.
Okay,
Yes.
great. They're the ones that are notorious, and correct me if I'm wrong on this. Were we talking about this yesterday with the green M&Ms?
Oh yeah.
They would
David
write in
Lee
their
Roth.
contracts
Yep.
that they had to have the bowl of the green
Yeah.
M&Ms, and everyone misunderstood why they would do that. It's so genius. But anyway, so Ishmael is sent away with his mother Sammy Hagar, right?
Yes.
That's right.
All right.
And the Lord made a great nation of him. Muslims view him as their patriarch. First off, do I have the above correct?
Yes, you do. It's not
Um,
Sammy Hagar. That was my interpolation. That was the DVT or whatever you called it. But yeah, you got it right.
Was this God's plan to start the Muslim nation and religion? Is the Muslim God the same as our own? I often hear leftists claim that. How does Jesus fit in with this?
Yeah, great question. Let me just explain who the characters are and what's going on in the storyline, because that'll give some insight into the end question, which is just, man, fantastic. So there is a guy named Abraham, and out of the blue in Genesis chapter 12, God just selects Abraham to be the person through who he is going to enact his rescue operation for the world. There's some context to this, but what's notable about Abraham is the choice seems somewhat arbitrary and random. It's not because he's great or powerful or wealthy or influential or even for that matter, holy and righteous. God just says, it's you and your offspring. So Abraham is married to Sarai. Her name later becomes Sarah. And they are like wicked old and still haven't had a kid, despite God saying, through your offspring, you will be blessed. The nations of this world will be blessed, on and on and on. Well, it's easy when you start hitting like the shall we say, the 70s of life.
So how long was that amount of time from when they were told that to when they did have their first kid?
Doesn't say.
Okay.
It doesn't say, but you know that they start getting into their 70s, and it's like, ain't nothing happening here.
Yeah.
Right?
Pushing the boundaries a little bit.
And like a lot of people, you start to doubt the promises of God because they just don't seem to be coming true. So I would love to have been a fly on the wall in this conversation. Abraham gets together with Sarah and goes, hey, honey, I've got a good idea. What if I sleep with your maidservant and we get kids through that? You know, and whether Sarah was compliant or supportive or rolling her eyes or resentful, we don't know. But through that union of Abraham and Sarah's maidservant, Hagar, we get Ishmael. Now, God shows up after the fact, and he goes, again, DVT, what are you doing here, Abraham? Did I not promise you that you were going to have a child the way that I was going to orchestrate it? But God redeems mistakes. And God loves people regardless of their pedigree and history and how they've come to be. And he's like, look, I'm not going to do my promise through Ishmael. I'm going to bring my rescue operation promise for this world through a son that's going to be born to Sarah. But that doesn't mean I'm writing Ishmael off. I am going to make him into a great nation as well. However, even though Ishmael is historically thought of as basically the Arab nation, it would be a mistake to think that God was planning to set up the Muslim nation because Islam is a belief system. It is not attached to a race, even if we happen to see it most widely practiced among Arabs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is the Muslim God then the same as our own God? I think when you ask these questions, while well-intended, you're starting with the wrong question, so it's always going to lead you to the wrong answers. I think this is the better question to ask. What are the similarities between the Muslim's view of God and the Jewish or Christian view of God, and what are the differences? Don't just ask a blanket question, is it the same God or not? Ask, what do they think about God? What do they believe about God? And do it point by point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'll be a far more fruitful discussion for you and avoid some of the just traps people get themselves into.
Yeah,
and
you can see what characteristics line up, because it's hard to try to go, yep, this like concept of God and this concept of God, sure, they're the same. Like you don't have the details to figure that out.
Right, because there's certainly similarities between, on many points, between the Muslim view of God and the Christian view of God, but there's also many differences.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key differences is this question asker brings up is, how does Jesus fit in with this? Jesus posits himself as the incarnation of God or the image of the invisible God. So Jesus puts himself forward as far more than a prophet. He says, I am God in the flesh, that when you see me, you see the Father. And the Bible will put this, and Jesus himself will put this a dozen different ways. And so the difficulty with thinking of Islam as something God has set up would imply that Islam is the next greater revelation after Jesus, because Islam doesn't come around for another 600 years after Jesus. Jesus puts himself forward as the greatest revelation, and everything else is commentary before and after.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps you navigate some of the Christian Muslim debates. And I encourage you, if you have a friend or a family member who is a Muslim, or if you're Muslim listening and you have a friend or a family member who's Christian, get into the conversations. It's fantastic. And
I think you said it, but maybe repeat or expand upon it again. So the Muslim religion do they not believe that Jesus is God? Or
correct.
Or they say he is, but then there was another thing better than him.
So the way that a Muslim religion would approach the God question, and of course they call God Allah, but that shouldn't throw you off either, because Allah is just how you say God in Arabic.
Yeah.
So a Christian who is a native Arabic speaker could say Allah while not meaning the same conception that a Muslim is using in that same language. Just like people could talk about God today and mean 1,000 different things by it, right? Yeah. So the Islamic religion has a very high view of Jesus. They see him as really arguably the greatest of prophets, maybe second only to Muhammad. But they see him as nothing more than a prophet. Yeah. Another in the long lines of prophets that God has been sending, or Allah has been sending, to draw people back unto himself, with Muhammad then coming across being the final and greatest revelation of that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Ooh, a creation one now.
All right.
We're all over the place.
All right.
Was the 6-day creation story and 7th day of rest a blueprint for the future 6,000 years and 1,000 year millennial reign of Jesus?
This is a great question. Keep going. Yeah.
Also, Jesus being dead for 2 days before his resurrection being a clue from God he would return after 2,000 years, around the year 2030.
I love this. Thank you for asking, and we really appreciate it.
It sounds a little like Da Vinci Code-esque.
It does sound Da Vinci Code-esque, and very, or like Left Behind, if you were like trolling the end time speculation kind of hot novels 20 years ago and things like that.
Yeah.
By the way,
Bible code.
Like, because I've had my back blown out. It's been a lot of bed rest lately, and man, it's just rough finding stuff to watch on Prime. You know,
it is.
It's not
like because I'm not buying
best collection of stuff.
Right. But it comes to mind because the Left Behind movies were there for viewing enjoyment.
Is that the Nick Cage one?
There's the Nick Cage one. There's actually been several done with different actors. Kirk Cameron did one. There's a later one. And again, there was like 12 books, I think, in the original Left Behind series. So are they just doing sequels? I never really got. I read the first few books, but I never got into the movies. I saw the first one years ago, and it just, shall I say, was not my thing.
Yeah,
I'll leave it at that. And with all deference to those who with sincere hearts have tried to make a product, but it sounds Da Vinci-esque, but it's really not as new as you think. This is actually a Jewish idea that, and you could see elements of this in the very early church as well, that yes, the 6 days of creation and the seventh day rest did in fact set up a blueprint for 6,000 years, followed by a 7,000 year millennial reign. Now, this is not biblical. This is extra biblical, and I want to make that clear. I am not quoting chapter and verse on this. I'm quoting Second Temple Jewish speculative theory on this, and of course, some very early church speculative theory as well. And, I think as humans, Da Vinci Code is a great example. We love to look for patterns. We like to see secret wisdom and codes and underline. It just kind of lights us up. So I think there's always a proclivity we have to kind of resonate to that type of stuff. Especially if it's tantalizing in certain ways. But
I mean, that's probably why all primetime shows on every TV channel are the murder mystery, the unsolved crimes,
48 hours.
Because we want to feel like detectives, but
right,
not have to do the work or have the consequences of it. Like,
and isn't it true? Like, I think I saw this, that aren't true murder podcasts the highest listened to podcasts?
Yeah, they are.
Like period.
And the like crazy demographic, like the male to female ratio of listeners on those is so heavily skewed towards females, for which seems a little bit odd to me, because generally most of those the victims are females.
Yeah.
So it's like it's
but they're more logical and figure it out faster.
There's got to be a psychology of that, though. I mean, I would love to get the ins and outs of that, right? So let me just wrap this question up with going, Jesus being dead for 2 days before his resurrection being a clue from God he would return after 2,000 years, maybe around the year 2030. No, I think you're looking for a clue where there isn't a clue on that, even though there's some speculative theory. Again, for the reasons we've talked about. Now, again, if 2030 rolls around and Jesus comes back, which, by the way, would be awesome, I will be the first to say, got that one wrong. But I don't think that there's a hidden Bible code that is or pattern trying to set up what God's going to do that way.
Yeah. Hey, but you know what? Live your life like he is coming.
Yeah, totally. That is biblical, right?
Right. That's a beautiful thing. Listen, you're listening to 21.6 The Net. This is Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church, live every Wednesday, 12:30 Central. You can text your questions to 815-314-0363, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're sitting in Fellowship of Faith on a Sunday morning, and Pastor Dave's up there giving his sermon, and you get a question, text it in. He won't be right. I mean,
just you got it, man.
Whip it right in. You wake up in the middle of the night because you can't sleep because something's on your mind. Text us. Yeah. We'll get it. You'll never get a busy signal.
The 3 a.m. questions are the best questions.
They are the best.
Always the best.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Huge week, as you said. Of course, every Sunday we're live as well at 9:55 for pregame, and then we go live. But we've got the pilgrimage this Palm Sunday. Huge party at Fellowship of Faith. One of our big ones. People walking from their home, pilgrimaging to church.
I got talking to one couple. They're coming from Wilmot, Wisconsin, which is a 30-mile walk.
Yeah.
That they're doing. And they're going to set out at like probably 10 p.m. and just walk through the night.
God love them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
Cool.
Yeah. We move closer to church.
That was the easier. For this 1 day a year walk, let's move houses. Right. Yeah.
But hey, if you want to see something cool, the travelers coming in all throughout that morning is going to be awesome. Then we're rolling into Holy Week, so a lot of stuff, a lot of fun going on. Check us out at fellowshipoffaith.org. On Sundays you can go live, right? It's
live.fellowshipoffaith.org.
Yep. So dots, not at, just live dots.
And this Sunday, because of the pilgrimage, is just a little bit different. We're going live at 9:45 instead of 5 minutes before.
Yeah.
So you get to see some of the traffic and people coming in.
It's gonna be cool.
I know this last week we had some live streaming issues. We had a lot of internet problems last week. Hopefully those are all solved now.
Yeah.
So we've been working this week with Comcast.
Yeah. There's been reconciliation efforts with Comcast, right?
Yes, there have been. So far we've been floating good this week. So hopefully that continues.
Hey, quick shout out too to our Facebook listeners here today. We got Jen on air with us and Michelle. Great to have both of you with us. Gene, as always, good to see you. And Trinity, so glad that you're tuning in here today. Thanks for being a part of the show.
Yeah, awesome. And I see there's 12 other people watching. So let us know who you are.
Facebook folks.
We'd love to say hi.
Don't be creepers.
That happened last week. Steve and I were live for like 45 minutes and we're like, there's no comments. Are we actually live? Like, we don't even know.
Right.
So thankfully a couple people typed in to go, great. Okay, people are hearing us.
Yeah, you got it.
Now, the other thing, just a quick shout out to our guy Sparkplug, right over there, 2x2 with one of his MC members, Kink, and they're just out there, living the gospel out in Europe, traveling around and just spreading the good news. So want to shout out to them. I know they're listening. Yeah, right.
Always.
Middle of the night over there in Europe, wherever they're at.
24/7 feed.
But prayers go out to what they're doing. They're doing a documentary. It's going to be really, really cool to see as well. I tried to dig on them a little bit, say, hey, give me a story, give me something we could talk about, questions, but the time difference and whatnot.
Yep.
So we'll wait yet to come. So I think it's going to be really, really cool, which is great. Yeah. Jen says, yeah, we're here. We're listening and working.
And thank you for listening on the sly. That's your job,
Yeah, exactly.
Love that. Yeah,
exactly.
That's great. All right. What do we got? Hey, by the way, 815-314-0363. Did you say this, Kent?
Yep.
Did my mind blank? Oh, I'm sorry. You got it, but you can never hear it too many times, I guess. 815-314-0363 is the way to text in the question, or just post it right on Facebook. We'll get it that way.
We got your number.
Yeah.
Now I want to throw a challenge at people. I want your most controversial question that you have. Like what is the top controversial thing in your mind? I want to hear those things. So.
Yeah. All right.
So, I mean, if I would be, and Gene thanks, says, hi guys, glad to see you up and around, Pastor Dave. So right now, Tennessee is rolled. Somebody went in and shot babies. I mean, they're 9-year-old kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that here in America, we twist this into a political thing. So I want to put politics aside and just go, why? Where's God? What's happening? How could he let babies do this? I know there are people out there listening right now who probably have the same question as I do.
Yeah, you bet.
But don't know how to say it. And for the life of me, hey, this wasn't God's will, or what? Yeah, how do I wrap my head around this and just go, what in the good name of?
Yeah.
And I think how can then yourself try to comfort someone else if you don't even have an understanding yourself? Yeah.
Right. So, I don't know if you've got anything on that, but
that's a hard one, Kent, and it's proverbially the question that we all face in the face of any kind of suffering. I don't know if we ever get to the bottom of that one. When you look through the Bible and Christian theology, it doesn't give just one answer to the problem of evil. It gives several. And the real trick is knowing which to apply to the right circumstance. But the problem is it's really something more for the mind of God than the mind of us. So you're left speculating. And people who are often well-intentioned, I find, will whatever the crisis or calamity or travesty might be, will try to bring answers into it. And my experience is that none of them really soothe the wound.
Right.
It's just like, when you're standing at the coffin of, any small child, that is not the time to be preaching a theology of evil.
Right.
It's just to cry out, oh Lord, how long, oh Lord, have mercy and save. That's about all you've got at those points, because it is so raw, and just leaning into the promises that God is a God who suffers too. God is a God who travels through the journey with us. for whatever reason he allows it, which gets people angry. It's caused people to refuse God, reject God. I get it. I get it. But at the end of the day, God simply invites you to trust him in the times of horror and see him as your ally rather than your enemy.
Yeah.
And it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's a tough one. Kelly just kind of goes on and says how to deal with all the current angst going on around us, leaders, countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And here's a good one. And Jen is her husband's part owner of the station here. So she's a big part of the family, but she says her most controversial thing is that she's encountered is someone thinking she was getting messages from the devil because sometimes she gets messages from spirit, but it's all positive messages, right?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Jen.
So, there are those who, God, Jesus talked to, and all of a sudden, you're you're a devil worshiper or whatever. How do you work around that when,
Yeah. And and I want to say this for a lot of our listeners, I do believe in a spiritual world, in a spirit world that's alive and active in this world and behind the scenes of things. I believe that because I think Jesus believes that. And I think that's been the biblical witness and the Jewish witness before it forever. It's very counter to, I think, a modern worldview as it exists today. So understand that I'm predicating my answers on that assumption off the bat.
Yeah.
And I think the danger people get into today is that they've equated the word spiritual with good. That would be the same as saying technology is good, right?
Right.
Or fill in the blank. It's too broad of a category just because it could be good, it could be bad. I think there's good spirits. I think there's evil spirits. I think there's deceptive spirits who look good, but truly are bad, just like there's con men that exist today. And so it's something that I think has to be, you have to tread the ground very carefully.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with that. And something that's always struck me as interesting, because I've always had an interest in this type of thing as long as I can remember, and had my own share of experiences in this world. But the amount of times that the Bible is adamant about steering people away from the quote spirit world in terms of mediums, diviners, people engaged in various occult practices. And it's odd because sometimes the Bible will just come out and go, this is a load of crock. And a lot of times there is a load of crock out there. I was listening to a great podcast by an astrologer, an actual really good astrologer, really kind of throwing her hands up in despair and frustrated at all the schlock astrology going on out there.
Yeah.
And she's coming forward as someone who is highly trained in this. There's actually certifications in this. Has really devoted our life and going 90% of what's going on out there in the name of astrology is nothing more than some, people in the back room of a magazine and frustrating because they're kind of spoiling your craft, so to speak.
Yeah.
So sometimes the Bible will talk that way. And I think with good reason that, sometimes what you're experiencing is just natural. Or in your head or whatever else. But I think God allows a lot of room for actual interface with the spiritual forces of this world as well, and warns of the dangerous ones.
Yeah, I think you always have to be discerning.
Yeah.
And
that was the word I was thinking of.
And is it that voice in your head who I call Gerald? Right. Or is it really the Lord speaking to you, and what situation, what is it telling you, And I know Jen very, she's,
no.
She's the godmother of one of my kids. And
I appreciate the question, Jen.
And she is
the conversation.
She is a constant researcher, right? Listens, digs, doesn't just go, well, voice told me to walk off the building. That doesn't do that. So it's always digging deeper into the message, what's happening, who's it for, what, why did I, why did I think I heard that? Why did I hear that? Yeah.
I think of people in the Bible and how often it's recorded that they had visions or were approached by angels. I don't think many people today, at least in American Western culture really experience that. But a lot of people I've talked to who are Christian converts from Islam, almost a majority share will say at some point a vision was involved or a dream was involved. We'll have to have Hisham Shahab on the show at some point. He was he grew up in Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War. His brother, if I remember right, was murdered. He was actually he was loosely associated with Hezbollah. He was on his way to do a hit, and God saved him through a car accident, is how he puts it. It was through reading the Sermon on the Mount and a nurse that was witnessing to him. But he'll talk about the amount of people that he interacts with because he does outreach to Middle Eastern refugees here in the States now, that if they come to Christ, it's usually because there was some kind of vision that was involved.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So yeah. C.S. Lewis wrote a book, a space trilogy. Everyone knows him for, the Narnia series, more fantasy based. But if you've never read a space trilogy, it's just fantastic about taking a scientific worldview to the Bible and looking at things. And one of the books, I forget where it is in order, is called Out of the Silent Planet. And the basic premise of the book is he's allowed to go to all these different worlds, and it's literally like Venus and Mars, where God and his spiritual forces are at work in very active ways, and they haven't fallen. But Earth is called the silent planet by all these other worlds because it is the world where humans have stopped listening and have started denying that this kind of stuff exists. And if you have that scientific mind and want to approach the question that way, I'd highly, highly recommend it.
Cool. Yeah. I wrote
he talks about like little things like he talks about omniscient just being the speed of light times 12. You're just moving so fast that you are perceivably everywhere at once. Just fascinating different ways to think about these things that sometimes give people who are more scientifically oriented issues.
Yeah. Which that reminds me, I just this weekend watched Everything Everywhere All at Once. And it goes into some of that. Yeah. How you're experiencing all of these different realities at once and what that does to you. It was very confusing, interesting, introspective, a lot of, and it doesn't help that I watched it in like 4 chunks, so I didn't watch the whole thing back to back because I kept running out of time. But really, really good movie.
Okay.
Yeah, Kelly says, what about all this TV and ghost hunters, crazy proof of scary stuff and demons showing themselves?
So there's something interesting, and I'm going to make a plug for something that we're doing at Fellowship of Faith here after Easter. We've been doing something all year called The Last Apostle. And the last living apostle was the Apostle John. And what we've been doing to date is going through the Gospel of John. It's fascinating if you look in the early church, because throughout the Gospel of John, there is a heavy, heavy emphasis on the spirit and the spiritual. And it seems that some people took John's early gospel and started to distort it to almost use spirit as a way of trumping Jesus and claiming that they're moved by the Spirit, and because it must be the Spirit in me, then it's good. And so a lot of people think that 1 John, which is a letter you'll find in the Bible, is actually John's response to the way people were distorting his gospel. And it's almost like a commentary on his gospel, trying to correct some of the false spiritual ideas that people were sinking their teeth into. So I'm looking forward to the journey together. I encourage you, maybe tune in with us if you're really into this topic, talking about when is the spirit good and how do you discern the spirits, and how do you know if it's the spirit of God or the bean burrito you ate last night, or all that kind of stuff. So
it's probably telling you
nothing against bean burrito makers out there.
No, they're good. We love them. Keep up the good work, guys. You're fueling America.
Yeah, one of the things I've generally heard about hearing from the Spirit, or discerning what happened, is that generally that I'm assuming all the time that message from the Spirit is never going to contradict what has been previously revealed about God.
And that's John's big point.
Yeah. So if you're getting something revealed to you and it's lining up with Scripture, it's lining up with either a certain belief system or something like that, then that is pushing you more towards, okay, this might be a spiritual revelation. But if it's something that is completely contradictory and different, then most likely not.
Yeah. And for John, the big thing too is also that within that, it should always be pointing you towards the physical Christ. There's a danger that comes all the way out of like Greek thought and Platonism, that we think of the spirit in the spiritual world as being of a higher caliber or worth than the material world. And that truly is not biblical. God created matter and loves matter, and it's part of his design. And so if we start distancing ourselves from the physicality of Christ, the physicality of this world, Jesus' physical death, it starts getting you into a
So maybe the police had it right? We are spirits in the material world. Thank you, everybody. I won't sing it.
Please,
come on. No, trust me.
We're all
Google
hoping.
that. AI that. Yeah.
So Kelly, you're asking, Kent, you quoted it earlier about TV and ghost hunters and stuff like that. Yeah, great question. We will get into some of this stuff in the next coming weeks. We just encourage you to tune in and be a part of the journey.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Keep in mind too, a lot of it is show business.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Back to the same astrology thing. Yeah, you can't.
It's just like
lump them all.
"Quote unquote" reality TV.
Right.
0% reality at all in there.
Right.
Here, let's
that's
go.
What we've coined it as.
Let's go look at 3 houses. They've already bought one of them, but let's go look at 3
Yeah,
anyway.
right.
This one here I think is interesting. What are your thoughts about starting prayers? Ellipses, if it be your will. So I'm guessing
so like
starting
every time
prayers,
you pray.
God, if it be your will, I'm asking for this or show me this or something. How are we to start our prayers and petitions to God?
Thank you. There is no formulaic answer to this, and it really stems out of motivation. I can see that there can be a certain piety and a certain humility that always comes out of this attitude, if it be your will. And if your personality is as such that you're always fighting to submit yourself to God's will, I could see there being a lot of wisdom to that. But there's another side of it, because I've also heard people that I really respect come back on this going, when you read the prayers of the Bible, people often also pray boldly. And Hebrews will talk about how we can approach the throne of God with in grace with confidence and boldly presenting our requests. And it is okay, because the Psalms show us this is okay, to go to God and go things like, God, how could you? God, why don't you? God, I want you to. God, you promised. It's okay to hold God at his word. So you've got to nuance it in what's going on in your own heart, because you never want to become arrogant over God, and you never want to become someone who thinks you can boss God around and God is there to do what you tell him to do. Well, guard that, right? On the other hand, if you're someone who's always the wilted flower, always afraid to really ask and share God what you want because you're always couching it, well, if it's your will, pony up, you just come to God. It's all good.
The wilted flower.
You know what, though? I'll throw this on the table, is I've come to radically rethink the Lord's Prayer. And that line where Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think a lot of people pray that as a consolation, or a resignation. It's like, well, this is I want this person healed, but Lord, your will be done.
Mm-hmm.
Is it God's will that people are healed? Are people sick in heaven?
Right.
I mean, you're literally praying for God's kingdom to invade and all the goodness and righteousness and justice and restoration and redemption of God to invade the world. I've come to discover it as a very bold prayer to say, God, what you are going to do in your kingdom to come, what you are doing in heaven now, make that reality here on earth. So pray boldly that way. That's how Jesus teaches you to.
Yeah. So it's not a prayer out of like pleading or meekness, but of rather, hey, do what you promised.
Yeah.
Like do what you are doing actively, which I think is really cool. And one thing we talked about this recently with our youth group, and some of the youth and some of the adult leaders as well, they're like, prayer is hard.
Yeah.
Because you hear it a lot. You hear people doing it a lot, generally in more corporate settings. But a lot of people, they were just like, but I don't know how to talk to God.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can understand praying in a group, but I don't know how to have a conversation with him.
Yeah.
And that's something that I hadn't necessarily thought of directly before, but then it's like, I I don't think I was really doing that either until after college of like, oh, I'm having a conversation with God. It was, let me pray this Bible verse, or let me pray this pre-written prayer, which are all good things.
Sure.
But yeah, then you're missing out on that personal conversation as well.
Yeah.
No, I'm the guy who says it's easy, right? Because God knows your thoughts before you speak them. So if I'm talking to you, and this took me a long time to be comfortable with, and I say, hey, Dave, I'm going to pray for you, right? I'm really at that point praying for Dave, because at that moment, God knows my intentions and my thoughts.
I'm almost engaging at a subliminal level.
And if I didn't, later at night or whatever, if I didn't remember to pray for Dave, I felt, oh my God. I said I'd pray for him. I didn't, here comes the lightning. So to me personally, praying is, this podcast is a prayer, right? If I get into a song, I don't care what it is, but it resonates with me and it makes me think of Christ or think of God. That's a prayer to me, right? So I'm a different one. I get very upset at the grocery list of, Lord, please pray for Jane, Bill, those, because God already knows. So as I wrap my head around, it's just, hey, Dave, I'm gonna pray for you. Now, if Dave goes, okay, let's pray. Now I'll stop and then let's do it together, and we'll have a conversation with God together. I've also seen people who pray and are moved. I mean, their voice isn't what's coming out of them. I've never heard anybody speak in tongues, but I've heard people pray that I was like, what?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And that's an amazing experience as well.
Yeah. And the one thing I think for me with like that understanding, I love that understanding, is that for me, like that type of prayer where it is that God already knows. For me, that doesn't leave time for me to listen. So like for me, it's like if I'm like journaling and praying to God, then when I finish that, that's the time when then I'm listening for God. Whereas if I don't set apart that time to actively converse with him, then I'm never taking the time to listen to what he's telling me. Yeah,
so, no, I'm with you, and I
don't think it's one or the other or anything like.
And in my daily, strides, I find that time.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to, and it's good for you.
Yeah,
it's truly good.
It keeps kind of grounded,
Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you there too. But for a long time, many years, when I was younger, it was, hey, I'll pray for you, and then I didn't sit down and say, hey, please pray for Dave's back and healing, and and then I was like, man, I feel I let him down.
Shame, yeah,
right. But God was like, no, I knew your intentions when you said it. So
yeah, reading the list is not
right. But if you don't, I think praying's cool. And it's, you can spend a lot of time in prayer during a day without having to get a mat out and get on your knees and incense and everything.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I think you mentioned about like praying boldly. I know for me, there's sometimes when you're like, oh, I don't want to pray for this thing to God because either you don't want to admit it or you don't want to ask for it. And it's this weird sense of like, oh, well, maybe I can keep this hidden from God. But he knows it already.
Right.
But it's amazing how freeing it can be to finally just let that out and go, okay, here, I'm saying this now. And because then you're taking it out of your head and out of your suffering and your little circle and going, here, God, take this. Like, take control of this.
And have you ever gotten wrapped up into the thinking too of going, oh, if I admit it, it's not even that it's hidden, but then it activates it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure if I want this, but no, I've said it now. So God's going to,
now he's going to respond.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, is that any good? I'm not sure.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing about God is God is that, if I can use an image, God is that monk or that little Asian guy at the top of the mountain who just listens, doesn't say 3 words. You go up there and go, and then you walk down and go, oh, I got to figure it out.
Yeah. It's the free therapist.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And that's the beauty of prayer too, is when, when you don't look for God's answer, I guess. Is that a good way to say it? I mean, you throw it out, but then you're like, And when I say throw it out, you give it to them.
Yeah.
Just give it all, and then go.
When it gets beyond requests.
Yeah.
There was one other question from last week that I think maybe we can get into when Steve's back here for a little discussion.
Okay.
And it's his very last one. I just wanted to bring it up so we don't forget about it. It says the question is more for Steve Wells. And it was asking, do you think that marijuana is a gateway drug? Is it okay?
Yeah, I heard you guys talking about that. Yeah.
So I think that'd be a cool discussion to get some maybe more biblical perspective into it, because we talked more experiential. But I think that'd be a cool thing to touch on next week, 2 weeks from now, something like that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're out of time on the show here
today.
Let's
get one more. Gene's got one. Just real quick. We can run over a little bit.
Okay.
It is, can speaking in tongues be imparted by a Christian who received this gift to one who has not?
Yeah, great question, Gene. I'm not so sure it's imparted as much as it's spirit given. There is a precedent in the Bible for imparting a spiritual gift to another. You see it with Elijah and Elisha, for example. But at some level, God's always behind it. I think it's really a gift that God chooses to give when and where he pleases. And it's not something that you have to figure out how you can impart on someone else or gain from someone else. I'll add one more thing on there. Sometimes I think we restrict speaking in tongues too much. I think it actually occurs a lot more among all believers in churches and of belief systems where they don't even think about speaking in tongues. And I go to this little phrase that this little verse you have in Romans, where it talks about how when we come before God, our spirits groan with words that cannot be expressed, and that the Holy Spirit intercedes for us in that. And how many times is just some of the groans of your soul a prayer in its own right that you don't have to articulate, but you are speaking a language that God can translate.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you look at it that way, you're like, shoot, I speak in tongues all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool.
So yeah, great question, Gene. And hey, only a minute over, but not too bad. We'll land the plane. This is Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you'd like to catch our past episodes, we would really be happy and encourage you to do so. Go to any of your favorite podcast providers. That is Spotify, Apple, whatever you like to do. You're probably going to find it. Just search Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church. Go ahead and follow us. Go ahead and like us. Go ahead and subscribe. And we go live every Wednesday afternoon at 12:30 p.m. Central Time. If you'd like to catch us that way through 216 The Net. So until next week, we wish you all God's blessings. Thank you again for the great questions. And remember, 24/7, you can send them in and we will get to them as soon as we can. Take care.